Good evening, welcome to the School of Visual Arts and welcome to the Design Criticism MFA department. My name's Alice and I'm the chair of the programme. Lovely, thank you. If you have time to join us for a drink after the lecture, please do. We have drinks and snacks in the other room. And if you're interested in any aspect of the programme, I'll be the one near the bar and I'm very happy to talk to you about any aspect of it. This is our spring lecture series, which you are attending one of the lectures of, and it's been specially curated by the first year students of the programme. These speakers represent their sort of own personal obsessions and interests and bring to bear new thinking and new personalities and voices to our core curriculum. We've had some great ones so far, which you can find videos of on our Vimeo site, and some good ones to come. So yeah, come back for more or check us out on the website. I want to mention just two of our upcoming events before we get going with the real meat of the evening. The first is the Design Criticism Conference, which is coming up on Saturday, May 11th. And this is also organised by the students of the programme, but this is the graduating students who will be presenting really beautifully distilled versions of their thesis work that they've been working on for the past year. And the way they've chosen to do it this year is to present themselves in counterpoint with some of the best minds in design criticism, curators, architectural theorists, urban planners, and so on. So we've got John Hockenberry, of the host of NPR's Takeaway, will be moderating the proceedings, so we'll know we'll be in very capable hands there. Keynote speech by Paola Antonelli, senior curator of architecture and design at MoMA. And then the speakers of which the students will be pairing themselves with include Andrew Blauvelt, who's a curator of architecture and design from the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis. Fiona Raby, who's one of the proponents of critical design. She comes from the Royal College of Art in London. Mark Foster Gage, really interesting design theorist and historian and architect himself. Tony Griffin, and the activist Michael Sorkin. So quite a nice spread for you, I think. And the students, being a small group this year, enjoy the rather wonderful ratio of one student to keynote speaker. So it should be a really great day. So mark your calendars for that. And before that, we've actually got a really special event coming up this Sunday, which we're helping to organise. A festival of really pretty rare BBC films that have been made with, that kind of celebrate the idea of design and the way you can use design as a filmic narrative. You can see amongst them will be these shorts about the bra, deodorant, Harley Davidson, and the London Underground map, which should be a lot of fun. In fact, one of the co-curators of this event, Adam Harrison-Levi, is right there. Do you want to just wave in case people want to talk to you about it afterwards? Because it's a really special event. Adam has arranged for Alan Yentob to come over from England. He was the controller of BBC One and BBC Two and currently their creative director. A really special guest appearance by Alan Yentob, and we'll be doing Q&A with Adam. And then I suppose the sort of the highlight, considering by looking at any magazine this week, it seems to be David Bowie week. We'll also be screening this amazing 1974 film, Cracked Actor, and we have a tiny excerpt for you right now just to get you in the mood. I hope this works. So this is just a short trailer.
I guess I'm living my fantasy.
What's your fantasy?
Bowie.
Ziggy played for time, jiving us up.
I never wanted to be a rock and roll star. I never, honest God, I wasn't even there.
One half of me is putting a concept forward, and the other half is trying to sort out my own emotions. A lot of my space creations are, in fact, facets of me, but I wouldn't even admit that to myself at the time.
So I think that gives you a taster of Bowie at his most tweaked and most creative. So definitely join us on Sunday for that and much more. All right, so now to tonight's event, which of course that's what we're all gathered here for. And to introduce our special guest tonight, I would like to bring to the podium one of our first year students, Sandra Nutt.
Good evening and welcome. My name is Sandra Nutt and I am first year student here at curator. A room full of fashion, a room full of ideas. Magazines are one of the most prominent rooms for fashion. The editorial fashion spreads play with fantasy and reality, perhaps with criticality. Are the spreads where photography meets fashion the art form of our time? Tonight I have the honor of introducing Vince Aletti. Why did I decide to invite Vince Aletti? It was simple. Here at curator we are aspiring critical thinkers studying design criticism, stalking the discipline's limits, trying to figure out our own role in it. Aletti is a veteran critic, author and curator, and he has explored the intersection of the topics that fascinate me the most, fashion and photography. Over the years, he has contributed to a number of publications. Perhaps most notable is his work as an art editor at Village Voice for almost 20 years, where he was also their photography critic. A role that Aletti now plays for The New Yorker. He reviews photography exhibitions for Going On About Town section. In 2005, Aletti won the International Center of Photography's Infinity Award for writing. He has done a lot of work with the ICP, and the latest exhibition he curated was only last year, an exhibition on photography in fashion magazines, Harper's Bazaar, A Decade of Style. The latter must have been a natural progression, since Aletti is also a fervent magazine collector. Last week, I met Aletti at his East Village apartment and had the great chance to get a glimpse of his grand collection. Change of a scene, change of a room. Let there be a room for ideas to transform into stories. Please welcome Vince Aletti.
Thank you, Sandra. I'm going to talk about fashion and layout and magazine design. One of the things that got me most interested in this was working, being involved with Andrew Roth's 2000 book, the Book of 101 Books, seminal books of photography, selected by Andrew Roth. I wrote the brief descriptions of half of those 101 books. And being involved in that project really made me think seriously about books and book design, very much through Andrew's approach, which is really rigorous, very thoughtful. He, basically culled down the history of 20th century photography to 101 books. And his criteria were really rigorous. He described it as a book, the books that he considered had to be thoroughly considered productions, a thoroughly considered production, the content, the mise en page, choice of paper, stock, reproduction quality, text, typeface, binding, jacket design, scale. All these things had to come together in the books that he chose. And working with that material, including a lot of books that I'd never seen before and was the first time I was able to hold and really appreciate them, made me think more seriously about book design and about magazines, which I collect more seriously and more sort of avidly than books, if only because they're a lot more available to me. Magazines don't have the same criteria. It's hard to apply all Andrew Roth's very serious criteria to all the magazines, but mainly because they're much more about commerce than art. But I do think that a great magazine photographer, especially someone who's gotten power over a period of years, is able to really use a magazine in a way that's creative and that is, for me, the equivalent of working in a book. I think many of the magazine productions that Avedon did, especially when he was at Harper's Bazaar, are as important as many of his books. So I chose a number of particular sequences from different issues, starting with this Avedon sequence from the October 15th, 1966 issue of Vogue. This is after he left Harper's Bazaar and went to Vogue to join Diana Vreeland there. And Vreeland was famous for many things, but especially her taste for exotica and for sending her photographers all over the world. It was partly why she didn't last there very long, because she cost them a ton of money. But she really enjoyed sending people out on kind of explorations. And this was one of the most extravagant. According to Polly Mellon, who was the stylist on this, it was the most expensive shoot that they'd ever done in the history of the magazine, and probably it was hard to match this later. It was all about furs. It starred Verushka, who was one of the great models of that period, and a real, very moody and kind of amazing-looking woman. I should say that all the pictures were done by Sandra at my house, and clearly under a kind of romantic light that was coming in through the window. So you have to excuse all this sort of moody lighting. But it gives you a sense of the light in my apartment in the mid-afternoon. This is the very first page of this spread. I'm going to show you all of them, because I just think that this is one of those sort of extended, heightened ways of dealing with fashion and with the sort of fantasy of the magazine. This spread, as you can see, it starts out as if it's a play or a film. The whole cast of people is listed on the right, including Dick Avedon and Verushka, who's identified as Countess von Lendorf. So it starts this sort of this sense of going on a trip. They're in Japan in what they call the snow country. Polly Mellon said she described it as her first assignment when she went from Bazaar to Vogue to join Vreeland there as well. They were on the road for 5 weeks in Japan with 15 crates of clothes, mostly furs, and what she described as a massive entourage. So it continues like this. It goes into color. It's all in these very exotic locales. And I'm just going to read you a little bit of the description. The writer who accompanied this troupe into the snow country describes it like this. We took the North Road from Tokyo, 3 big black limousines and a huge shiny van, snowy inside with a treasure of furs. There's not been a caravan like this in Asia since Marco Polo, we said to each other. In our cars were Verushka, looking like a golden Giametti, Dick, wiry and alert, with alertness, a high court chamberlain on a mission of delicate espionage, Polly, like a Renaissance lady-in-waiting, preoccupied with luxury, Ara, our nimble hairdresser, there was Ara Gallant, our numerous entourage of helpers and guides. The road was lined with glinting signs and tiny bonsai set in thresholds on the sun for us. That gives you a sense of this kind of heightened romanticism and kind of an exoticism that they were going for. This is so typical of fashion magazines at this period, and especially Vreeland's Vogue in these years. This is the male figure here is apparently, according to Polly Mellon, a sumo wrestler that they picked up in Tokyo, who was 19 years old, and according to her, the only person in Japan taller than Verushka. And he's really an extraordinary looking guy with an amazing nose. And kind of best seen here. So this whole sense of fiction that the fashion magazine is so good at concocting, this kind of was the peak of that. It's hard to believe it's now with furs not exactly being a popular topic that they could get away with something like this now, but it was very Vreeland to carry this on in this way. And it ends with this double spread with Verushka and a hairdresser, bare-breasted, kind of just there. I think, the sort of thing that Vreeland loved doing was a little bit tweaking her audience, challenging them to some degree, doing something that was much more typical of European Vogues than American. It was probably another reason why she didn't last too long. But she was really kind of adventurous and loved sort of pushing the boundaries. This was one of her most successful early stunts. The next thing I'm going to show you is Irving Penn. Again from Vogue, but earlier, February 15th, 1949. This is Penn, also kind of at his height. Although he wasn't known particularly for traveling or for doing except for his Worlds in a Small Room. A lot of his most famous fashion pictures were studio pictures. This is one of his early travel stories in Lima, with a sense of the fashion of the place. Both of these outfits are described as documentary pieces that were found there, not things that they brought along to dress her in. And here, what I love about this whole story is the sense of place, however fictional it may be. The model is really sort of set in these locations. Here she's in a cab with a driver chatting with her and this little boy kind of rapt attention. The caption for this is, "She has surfboarded at the beach, bought enough flowers to fill a cab, paid 8 cents for an armload of violets." Again, that's sort of typical of the fantasy that Vogue wants, or all fashion magazines, but particularly Vogue at this period, wanted to suggest. The idea of an elegant young woman traveling alone, making her way in Lima, here at a shoe shine stand. This is one of Penn's most famous pictures. Well, both of these actually, but especially the one of the model sort of stretched out in a cafe. According to Polly Mellon, who was also involved in this shoot, I believe, Penn had no interest in the sort of Baroque idea of Lima. He was really looking for the way people lived. He loved this little cafe. He wasn't interested in the architecture or the sort of fancy part of the city. And it ends with this really beautiful color picture. Penn was, I think, obviously one of the great fashion photographers. I love his sense of color here, the lighting, everything, the kind of comfort. And I think he really, what I think works for me in this is the sense of intimacy with the model, the appreciation of the woman in the clothes. And I think he's always been a photographer with very sensitive to not just the clothing, but the woman who's wearing them. The next thing I'm going to show you is not exactly fashion. This is more Irving Penn. When Penn was in Lima, he got very excited about the idea of working with people in their kind of own costumes. It was his first spreads in Vogue, the World's in a Small Room area, or section that he did, were in Cusco. And then he consistently did these spreads for usually the Christmas issue of Vogue. This is December 1967, where in the Christmas issues they really kind of pulled out all the stops, and they could do a lot of things. They were encouraged to do, clearly, the photographers were encouraged to do things that were not necessarily fashion. There could be like many pages of fashion, but before that there were all these sort of celebrations of the season, but in all kinds of formats. Typically Penn did lots of his flower pictures in the Christmas issues, so there would be like 5 or 6 pages of beautiful pictures of flowers, and this same issue had his tulips in them. But this sequence of pictures of young women in Dahomey is one of his early travel series. Again, this is in the middle of a fashion magazine, and while it may not be explicitly fashion, I think these are some of the great fashion pictures and some of his best work. And if you see them outside of the magazine, they're almost always reproduced in black and white. When he's made prints of these, they've almost always been in platinum. But for the magazine, he worked primarily in color. So it's one of the reasons I very much value these Christmas issues. It's a chance to see all the sequences of pictures in their original color. The same issue of Vogue, December 1967, included this sequence by Richard Avedon, a famous series of pictures he did of Nureyev. Again, not exactly fashion, but typically the counterpoint here are pictures of Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel. So everything is given a context, especially it's very, very like Vreeland to want to sort of bring in a classical reference, and this is really an appropriate one. But also, again, sort of challenging her readers with a naked man, even though he is Nureyev. The nudity is still kind of striking. Then moving on to Diane Arbus, who did a lot of her early work in magazines, especially in fashion magazines. This is a little bit later. She did a lot of work for Bazaar, portraits and things that had nothing to do with fashion for the most part, and for Esquire. But she also did these 2 supplements of children's fashions for the New York Times, which did run kind of regular children's fashion supplements, no longer. But I love these pictures partly because they're so little known, and they seem very unlike Arbus in some ways, but also the more you look at them, the more like typical they seem in her choice of models. They seem to me, and I believe that none of these are sort of professional children models. They're men, very much sort of ordinary and kind of great little kids. And there's something about the spirit of both of these supplements that I think is really kind of wonderful. And as I said, the more you look at them, the more they do seem like real Arbus pictures. This is really what she did, and I think she had a particular empathy with these kids. This is the second one. They're both from, let's see, one is from 1969 and this one is from 1970. The light in this one is quite beautiful. But again, there's something, I love the spirit of these and I love the kids. I think she really kind of connected with them, and I just also had a feeling that she had a lot to do with selecting each of these models. This is one of the more famous pictures. I know I've seen this reproduced elsewhere. It's one of the few from this sequence that you might get to see somewhere else. The next thing I wanted to show and talk about is Bruce Weber. One of the books that I wrote about for the book of 101 books was Weber's O Rio de Janeiro, which is one of his earlier kind of great productions of book design. Weber is, I think, one of the great fashion photographers, certainly one of the most influential when it comes to men's fashion and working with male models. But also, at this point, this is Per Louis, 1985, a whole issue with nothing but his work. By this point, he really had the power to do this kind of thing, to put out a whole issue, front to back, nothing but his own work, really, and also very much in his own design. It's clear to me that his he had the ability to kind of to make a magazine on his own, and it was very much like the design of O Rio de Janeiro, which had a lot of typography, a lot of kind of mixed up and collaged work, and it becomes really very personal. And I think for me, what makes a lot of the work that I'm showing to you important is that it really does reflect the photographer's intimate, authentic approach to his work. It doesn't feel compromised, especially this particular body of work, by working in a magazine. Because in this case, he really took over the magazine. This is the opening spread with inspiration, including it's his own writing about things that inspired him to get involved with fashion and photography, including on the left, Anna Magnani, and on the right, Peter Beard. Including other of his inspirations, this kind of goes on for several pages of collaged pictures and handwritten text, where he talked about Liz Taylor, Pasolini, Alain Delon, Chet Baker, and David Bailey. This is one of the beginning of one sequence that he did of in Hollywood. The complete fantasy of the back lot with all these guys kind of barely dressed as gladiators. I mean, these are some of his most famous early pictures, but this is like the most complete fiction of what Hollywood was like. This is Bruce Weber's idea of Hollywood. And also what I like is that throughout he kind of inserts some here and there pictures from the period, a period that he imagined, I guess, but also kind of going back and forth between his own pictures and things that he found. And then in the middle of the magazine is a gatefold spread. This is one part of it opened with a lot of pictures of young Hollywood stars, including right in that middle, Melanie Griffith. And all this obviously handwritten captions. It's very lively. It's very, what I like about what Weber was able to get away with, and still does, is this kind of just taking over, deciding how he wants to put pictures together, and usually kind of ganging things up, really giving you more and more. This is the continuation of that with Patrick Swayze biting a dog's ear. And then it goes on into some musicians, including these guys from, oh God, why am I blanking on this group's name? U2, thank you. So again, you know, the handwritten captions, the whole presentation is kind of great. Then it goes on into a whole thing about boxers. Obviously he just kind of could go wherever he wanted to go, and a lot of this has clearly nothing to do with fashion or with showing particular clothes. But this is, you know, what I love about this, the freedom to do, kind of go wherever you want. The guy on the cover of the magazine, by the way, is the guy on the right here, Andy Minsker, the boxer who he made, Weber made his first movie called Broken Noses, starring Minsker as this young, ambitious boxer. And this kind of also, it comes right after Weber did a whole issue of interview dedicated to the Olympics, with portraits of all the Olympic athletes in 1984. This next is Stephen Meisel. Again, someone who I think has incredible power in his work and is able to kind of do what he wants to do in Italian Vogue after being there for ages now. This is, I think, one of his best Italian Vogue series. It's, let's see, July 2005. An issue basically dedicated to the idea, or spoofing the idea, of plastic surgery. Meisel, I think, is for me the only person who comes up to the level of Avedon as a creative, inventive, really busy photographer who's very much in tune with the time that he's living in and very much reflecting that time, or at least always trying to kind of bring something out, often in parodies, but this is kind of somewhere between something quite serious and something kind of hilarious about plastic surgery. And it goes on for 80 pages. This is probably this is the most extensive thing. And since Weber, since Meisel has never done a book, never done a collection of his own photographs, this to me is one of the great Meisel books. It's as important as any book he could put out. It stars Linda Evangelista primarily, but many other models. Typically in the corridors and rooms of what's obviously a very expensive hotel for women to recuperate in, and then on the operating table, where he really pulls very few punches. There's lots of blood, there's lots of needles, but this is what I love about Meisel. Like Avedon, they both are really good at telling stories, setting up fictions, very elaborate stories, but they're also very, very conscious of doing their job. You can see all the details of the dress, the furs, the jewels. These pictures totally function as fashion pictures. And this is, what he's great at. Interspersed with all these double spread pages are, throughout this whole sequence of 80 pages, are these before and after pictures of models supposedly having gone through plastic surgery, basically just looking a little more cleaned up. Well, yeah, I don't think anybody is really bleeding, no. But well, you know, this kind of picture, here she is relaxing on a hospital bed, smoking. You know, clearly these things, he was having fun with this on a certain level, but at the same time, like I said, there's a lot of blood here. This is kind of a serious topic, and he's not letting us off the hook. He's not letting us look away. But again, he's showing these amazing dresses. There's a caption, there's a credit for every page. And the pictures, I think, are incredible. These are some of his most sustained and acrobatic and kind of just, you know, everything is going on in these pictures. Again, lots of needles and all this debris of bloody handkerchiefs and tissues. This is one of the more amazing ones. The light, I mean, all these setups clearly involve a lot of lighting, a lot of elaborately worked out images, but the light in this, I think, is particularly amazing. And here she is behind a kind of plastic curtain while something is going on around her thigh. Again, this is Italian Vogue, so there's a lot more breasts available than you would have in American Vogue. But notice all the medicines on the very beautiful side table with all the flowers. She's, I guess, signing some sort of release here, while her face is all marked up with lines to show where the surgeon should cut. Yes, she's on the phone. She's having a conversation. And notice all the tulle and the high heels. I mean, there's something insane about this whole series, but which is part of what I think Maisel is enjoying. And this room full of women with their heads bandaged and, you know, being taken care of by nurses, and it's high drama. This is the very last picture with Evangelista leaving, obviously having had her full, and a whole list of credits along the side as if it was a Hollywood production, which in some sense it was. I'm sure this took days and lots of planning. Research. Yes. The next thing I wanted to show you is Guy Bourdin. This is Paris Vogue, November 1970, a great cover, a pop issue. Bourdin, I think, was one of the, you know, strongest and most still very influential fashion photographers from the 70s. Many people still imitate him. He was very European in a lot of ways, in that he kind of pushed just sexuality, eroticism, into a kind of dark side often. This is one of the great Vogue covers. And the issue is about pop culture at that moment, but also kind of Woodstock, the celebration of Back to the Garden, this whole sense of youth culture. So this opens up with the spread by another photographer, Jean-Jacques Bougat, who obviously was working at various festivals. So this sets the mood. And it opens up with this series, Guy Bourdin, with the model Donna Jordan, who was one of the cult models of that period too. Didn't last very long, but really made an impression. But I think what's most interesting to me about this is not just the Bourdin pictures, but the context that they've been put in. Goes back to Jean-Jacques Bourgain again, photographing at some rock festival or some imagined rock festival, I'm not sure, but getting this sense of youth culture, boys and girls together, this very sort of hippie moment, including, again, some nudity and clothing, and stage, on stage, off stage. I think what fashion magazines love to do and can do really well when they're on top of it is get this sense of the cultural moment. Especially, they loved pop. I mean, Vreeland was so into pop culture and was happy to kind of pull in whatever she could. And the French extension of this is just as avid and excited about this moment in culture when it was very much about youth and freedom, kind of dressing however people wanted. But obviously, with clothes, I'm sure there were credits for this as well. And then I'm closing with a very new magazine, the latest issue of the Katie Grant's British biannual Love, with on the cover, Kate Moss, of course, photographed by Tim Walker, who I think is one of the really great young, maybe not so young anymore, but great new fashion photographers. Typically, best known for his very elaborate, almost Beaton-esque stage sets and of people in country houses with amazing props and roomfuls of flowers and tulle and all kinds of settings. He is famously over the top, but in the most kind of, I guess, over the top in a kind of controlled way. He really knows what he's doing, and he's really, really clever. This sequence is not particularly typical of him because the props are kind of minimal. They're basically flowers. And there's although I think there are some fashion credits to this, since Kate Moss is primarily nude, there's not a lot of them. This is, I think, one of the best sequences I've seen recently of a fashion magazine sort of pulling away from fashion. Just showing a model, a famous model, someone we all have seen repeatedly, in a very romantic way. And even though she's quite nude, there's something really sweet and tender about all these pictures. I love all the way the flowers are arranged around her. For me, one of my favorite issues of a fashion magazine was an issue of Dutch that was done maybe 12 years ago. Dutch was a great independent fashion magazine that didn't last too long. Its art director was Matthias Frans, who's gone on to be a very good photographer in his own right. But he did one issue with Michael Janssen that included no clothing at all. It's kind of one of my, a notorious, but for me a favorite example of what fashion magazines can do when they're independent and just don't care. It was I think there was very little in the magazine except Jansen's pictures in black and white of nude models romping through fields. Kind of, again, it reminds me in a way of that pop moment in the Paris Vogue, a sense of freedom, just, young models romping around with no clothes on, but captions on every page, Chanel, Prada, Vuitton, so that they were, in a sense, covering themselves, but also making fun of the whole idea of fashion and really being as free as they could be, allowing you to kind of imagine the fashion if you wanted to, but also to get the sense of, a magazine just going its own way. And this, in a way, reminds me of that. Although the settings are really kind of gorgeous, again, there's very little fashion going on. It's basically Kate Moss giving us a lot of attitude and kind of beautiful flowers. So I'm ending here with Kate, naked, flowers, very little fashion, but like I said, I think this is what fashion magazines, when they're really adventurous and inventive, can do. It's not like there wasn't tons of fashion in the previous pages and the pages that came after this. But what I like is when a magazine can kind of take its, go its own way, do something radical and playful, and I guess the other thing I want to emphasize is I've shown you discrete sequences, discrete stories. All of them are in the context of larger magazines, with the exception of the Bruce Weber, which he took over the entire magazine. They exist in this context with a whole lot of other stuff, a lot of stuff that may be interesting, may not be interesting, but that gives you this fuller picture of what the magazine wants to do. Sometimes, for me, it's easy to ignore all the rest of that, but it's also, I think, important to know that all that exists, that that whole sequence with Nureyev was in the same issue with the women from Dahomey, with Penn's Tulips pictures, with some insane, long Henry Clark travel story that went on for like 40 pages. So all these things have a context, and I think looking at a fashion magazine, that's part of appreciating that context, but also being able to sort of pull something out of that that has, for me, a life of its own. And something like this does. It kind of can exist separately from the pull of commerce.
Enjoyed the dappled lighting of your apartment. It's very atmospheric, you're right. There you go, you take the mic.
Okay.
And I think you brought us up, right?
I have a really big question, I think. How is fashion photography different from other forms of photography? Like, you touched it a little bit, I think, but...
Well, essentially because it's in the service of something. I mean, I think that's primarily how fashion is different. It's functional. It has to be functional. But it doesn't mean that it's only functional, which is partly why I love the Mizell work and the Avedon work. Both of them understood that they were doing a job and understand that they're doing a job. But it didn't mean that they couldn't follow their fantasies, tell stories, get us into some place quite different, but still show the clothes. So that, I mean, the primary thing is, although a lot of contemporary photographers seem less interested in this, and I can understand why. And I'm happy that a lot of magazines are less tied down to what Freeland called the buttons and the bows. I like when fashion works. I like when it does that job and also takes you to some other place at the same time.
Yeah. Why are there so many new magazines, especially niche and alternative fashion magazines? You've named a few, like Touch. But at the same time, people are talking about that print form is in decline.
Well, that's hard to answer because I'm just happy that there are so many alternative fashion magazines. I can't understand why or how they exist. Clearly, there is enough of an audience and a market for them to exist. It does seem to me that 99% of them are from Europe, where there doesn't seem to be the same emphasis on making money. But I don't know how that works. But well, it doesn't. But it does. It really. I'm just glad that there is still magazines, and because I'm terrified of the idea that print will go away at some point. I just don't. I refuse to believe that. And so I'm encouraged by the fact that there are all these new, and especially sort of, as you said, alternative fashion magazines. I don't quite understand who their audience is, but I'm glad they exist because also they give alternative photographers a place to work.
What are some of the ones that pique your curiosity most?
Well, I mean, I guess in a lot of ways I still go to a lot of the more traditional ones like Interview, W. I knew that you were going to ask me this. Of course, now I'm drawing a complete blank. I do like V Man, all the alternative kind of men's magazines. One of my favorites is what's it called? I'm sorry. The British one, Man of the World, and I don't know. I just think I'm glad that they exist. That there are all these kind of wild things happening, and a lot of them do, I think, push at the edge of what seems sensible in a magazine, which makes me happy.
You were involved a lot in the underground press in New York in the
Right.
60s, and I mean, obviously that was more music magazines that you were involved in at that point. But are there any correspondences between then and what you see emerging now?
Well, a lot of when I was writing about music in the 70s, 60s and 70s, the magazines that I was working for were like really, barely getting by for the most part, but Crawdaddy, Fusion, Cream, a lot of the smaller magazines didn't have a huge circulation. It didn't need to. They were kind of very niche. I don't know that that things like that can exist in quite the same way, except on the internet, which of course is like a huge, way for all that stuff to exist. Because a lot of there were a ton of underground newspapers in New York, none of which exist anymore. And that was really the first places that I worked. But I think all that kind of stuff, all that kind of alternative media is really available on the internet in a whole other way. I still miss print. I miss getting my hands dirty.
Are there any good examples, though, of fashion photography online that you think is pushing the medium?
I have to confess, I almost never look online. I just don't have the patience.
Should we talk a little bit about the music, the transition from music to...
Yeah, you you were the first one to write about disco music. So, how that writing corresponds with, or criticism? You were the music criticist first, and then photography critic.
Right.
Is there a relationship between those two? Like,
yes. I was a music critic because I love music. I'm a photography critic because I love photography. I was writing always from my enthusiasm and excitement about things. When I first started writing about music, it was because I wanted to tell people about these records that I liked. And I got a little more sophisticated along the line, but probably not a lot. And when I started writing about photography, it was very much with the same impetus that I wanted to talk about things that interested me and that excited me, and find a way to get that across to people. It's always, all the writing that I've done has come from kind of real passion and enthusiasm, and often just kind of because I've got to do it, and then find a way to make that make sense.
Tell us a little bit about your process about writing, perhaps first about music and photography, research, just how you went about approximating those musical sounds in words, and how you approached it.
My approach to music was pretty much instinctual and very much about the lyrics. I don't know anything about music per se. I might as well say this now after all these years. I don't know a chord. I couldn't describe those things to you, but I can describe what I feel is the emotion of a song and the emotion of a record and the message that I think people were trying to convey in that material.
Not just through lyrics, though, right? Through dancing as well.
Well, yes, through dancing. Well, it's true. Once I got to disco, but I think for me, disco, one of the reasons why I felt a lot of my fellow critics couldn't appreciate disco was that they didn't dance, and they didn't get, because it was very much about appreciating the music as a movement, and as a way to, the best way to understand disco was to dance to it. And if you didn't dance, you were losing and missing something. But again, that was kind of instinctual and emotional, and more about my feelings about the music than about my intellectual appreciation for it. Although I certainly tried to convey it as clearly as possible, and especially because often I felt I was being not argumentative, but proselytizing to some degree, especially with disco, where I felt I was talking to people who didn't understand and had to and needed to.
And part of what you're doing, wasn't it, was to kind of give people a sense of the role of the DJ in terms of sort of creating that larger
Exactly.
that larger piece of music.
Yeah.
In a sense that everyone else is talking about individual tracks. And
Right.
trying to show the experience of the whole night.
Exactly. I think that was the other thing that people who didn't go to clubs didn't quite understand, that it wasn't just a finite piece of music, it was something that existed for an evening.
And I wonder if there's a correspondence between that and your exploration of art direction.
Well, in a way, yeah, because I do think, one of the shows that I did when I was working at ICP with Carol Squires, our first show in this, what was called a Year of Fashion, was a show called Weird Beauty, contemporary fashion photography. And one of our main points with that show was that fashion photography does not exist as a page. It exists as a sequence of pages. And to take one single image and put it in a frame was not really representing the work. So what we did was actually use tear sheets to tear up magazines, which of course we hated doing, but to actually put magazine pages on the wall in the sequence in which they appeared. Of course, we couldn't do the 80 pages of Stephen Meisel's, but we could do at least 4 or 5 spreads and give people a sense of how that piece developed and moved, and that it was important, that it was the sequence, that it was a story, that it was a picture, a series of pictures that worked together, and often very, tightly. So while we did have some pictures and frames, they were the least important things in the show from our point of view. It was important for us to show work that, first of all, had not been in a museum before. Almost none of those photographers had been in a museum, and certainly not in this kind of context. So that was, although we went on to do a Richard Avedon show that we were very proud of, the Weird Beauty show was probably our proudest moment, because we were able to bring material into the museum that hadn't been seen before and kind of make people really look at it in a serious way. Most of the magazines that we were showing were European, and if you're not really totally absorbed and obsessive the way we were, a lot of people probably wouldn't even have seen the magazines that we were working with. And it was important for us to get that out too.
We'll work in a minute, but I have one more selfish question, which is that we studied curation here at Decrit as well as criticism, and I wondered to what extent you see curation as a critical act.
Oh, yes. For me, having never been a curator before I was asked to be one, it's, for me, a total extension of being a critic. It's all I'm doing is making choices. It's what I'm doing all the time. And being able to actually make those choices and put them on the wall was exciting. I do think that, that the best curators are really see things in connections, make connections between one thing and another. I'm not just putting a lot of separate pictures on the wall, but really making sense of those pictures together and why they should be in the same room, in the same sequence.
Is it like a form of art direction in a magazine? And
it is.
Creating
I see a very definite connection, because when you're putting pictures together on the wall, you're telling a kind of story. You're trying to make some connections. You're trying to show what those things have to say to one another, and ideally it's what an art director tries to do. The restrictions are and the freedoms are very different, because you're working on 2 pages at a time, and as a curator you can work on a whole wall and a whole room. So yes.
Yeah, questions? Oh, we have got some Bryn first.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your collection and sort of, we saw just that little picture of it, but sort of what kind of value it has for you and how you continue to add to it, sort of how you curate that, and then how you source the material for it.
Oh. Well, when I started collecting, it was really kind of mainly because I was interested in Richard Avedon and Irving Penn. And I was curious to see their work in the context. The first magazine that really made me intent on having it was Avedon did an entire issue of Harper's Bazaar in April 1965 for his 20th anniversary. And it was kind of an amazing issue. It was again, for me, the equivalent of any of his great books. It includes a lot of portraits. The whole theme was pop. And it was not something where he looked back on his history. It was very much about that moment in the culture. There were portraits of Bob Dylan, of the Beatles, of Henry Geltzeller. It was kind of an amazing issue. And I remember buying that issue when it first came out. Yes, I am that old. And then tearing it up and like putting that cover on the wall of every dorm room I'd ever been in, every apartment I ever had, and then thinking, how could I have done that? I need that whole issue. So I started looking for that issue, and in the process of trying to find that, I found just an amazing amount of other stuff. But mostly, again, thinking about photography, thinking about Penn, about Avedon, but eventually about Beaton and Horst and like everybody. So it became a kind of, wanting to be complete at a certain point and wanting to have a sense of these artists, these photographers' histories. So for me, it's like an amazing, incredible research when I need to think about how Lillian Bassman developed. To be able to actually see her work from magazine to magazine, see who's consistent, who's not, who gets bored with the work after a while. It's really a kind of education that I've given myself that I would not, there's just no other way to get it. Especially because the two photographers I'm most interested in, Penn and Avedon, are the two most rigorous about editing their own work. So if you want to see, all their work, you're not going to find it in their books. They are really, really careful about what they want to show. And for me, it doesn't mean that they're, that's not wrong, that it's good to edit. But it means that I'm missing a ton of stuff and a ton of really interesting stuff that's in the magazine. Especially like in Penn's and Avedon's case. When we were working on the Avedon show, there are almost no existing color prints except from very, very late in his career. He did a lot of color work. It doesn't exist anymore. So the only way to see that work is to look at the magazines. But I've also, of course, gone way beyond fashion. I collect all kinds of stuff. I collect photo books. It's become a little bit nutty, I have to say. But all this, for me, informs my sense of history of design, history of especially magazine design over the years. I really like seeing how things changed. And there have been some amazing short-lived magazines, Flair, Gentry, these magazines that only lasted a year, Junior Bazaar. So having those, it's part of the history of photography for me, but also the history of design and magazines and literature in a lot of ways. So, yeah.
I was wondering, as you were sort of developing your critical eye, your viewpoint, was there a greatest lesson that you learned or a really significant observation that you say that happened along the way?
Oh. I should be able to answer that question, but I think I'm going to have to come back to that. Nothing occurs to me. That's a really good question, but I'm afraid I'm drawing a blank. Yeah.
Diana Freeland's book was so, seemed like it was really concerned with the business of selling the dream of fashion rather than fashion as a product. And I find that Vogue today is more about the business of fashion, selling the product, and some of the dream as well. So I wonder, what do you think of Vogue, American Vogue today as opposed to American Vogue?
Well, in the great years.
Yeah.
There are very few magazines that can compare to their great histories of the 30s, 40s, 50s. Freeland's Vogue was unique. It didn't last too long. But I like American Vogue more than I expect to a lot of times. I like a lot of the photographers that they work with. There is actual content there that I appreciate. It's not It's not the great Vogue that it used to be. All, aside from a lot of the British and European magazines that don't seem to be tied down to their advertisers in the same way, most American magazines are very clearly about product. And, for however much they want to sell some fantasies along the way, they tend to get lost in product. So I think it's just inevitable. But it's what I like about Love magazine, that a lot of the British and European magazines do have a sense of fantasy and kind of carrying on that tradition of playing with fashion and taking it some other place.
There's a wonderful English magazine, 10 now. Have you heard of that?
I'm sorry?
10.
10, I like that too. Yeah.
Just following up on that question, I agree, Diana Vreeland's Vogue was fabulous, and today Vogue doesn't seem quite so fabulous, but don't you think that each magazine at that time is an exact reflection of its times?
Oh, very much so. And then that's what's so, for me, really valuable about all those things. That
so we can't blame that on Winter necessarily.
No, times change. Because even thinking about just Vogue, American Vogue, when Grace Mirabella took over after Vreeland left, I remember thinking, well, that's the end of it. Certainly, it's just not an interesting period. She went, sort of sporty American women. But when I look back at that with a more open mind, she was using Guy Bourdin, Helmut Newton, and Deborah Turbeville quite a bit, all of whom were really pushing the envelope in terms of fashion and what they could get away with, especially Turbeville. So that wasn't a really bad period, the way I sort of thought it was. So anyway, it's partly just looking more closely at a lot of issues and and realizing that there's always kind of something valuable to be drawn out of them. But it doesn't, when you think back to the great years of Harper's Bazaar, when Avedon was there, when Brodovich was the art director, these were some of the great magazines ever in terms of design. They were using Bill Brandt, they were using Lisette Model. All those magazines in the 30s and 40s had a sense, I think, of mission to inform their readers. They used great writers, they used great photographers, not just fashion photographers. They featured photography and art, and they really had a sense of being these important magazines, the way not too many magazines have that sense of mission anymore. And I think that was very important to them. Although their audience was mostly, for the early years, their sense of their audience was this upper class group of women who could afford the clothes that they were showing. And little by little, they opened that up because they had to. They had to appeal to a much broader audience. And that, I think, gave the magazines a lot more life. But they tended along the way to lose their sense of publishing, Nabokov or Carson McCullers or Henry James. There was not that same kind of sense of literary or artistic mission anymore. Anyway, I think I went way off the subject of that.
I was just wondering, when in fashion photography, if there's a value in making things look staged,
Less staged?
Making things look, making things look staged. So is there a value in calibrating how honest you're being about the fiction of it?
That's a complicated question. I don't think I think it's there are two ways of looking at the idea of staged. I think it's that some of the, using Mizell as a great example, those are just the most ultimately staged images, all those plastic surgery images. But he's also playing with authenticity. So there's this kind of going back and forth of trying to be as real as possible, but also making it very clear that these are just incredible, film cinematic fictions. So I love the idea of these big fictions, especially Tim Walker is another person who does that really well. But I think the other pull of that in fashion is the sense of authenticity, the grunge pictures of women kind of looking real, all that whole period of, in England, they called heroin chic. That was like the other extreme of authenticity, but it was, however real that is open to question. But current day, the opposite in a lot of ways of Mizell, someone who was really trying to be as honest and real as possible and made wonderful pictures. And I think in a lot of ways, Deborah Turbeville was also trying to be as authentic as possible to her feelings about the model and the situation. But at the same time, all those things are staged. There's no way to get around that idea of putting a woman in clothes in an environment that's probably she's never going to be in again. So I think you have to have both in a way, and I don't really value one more than the other. I just value it if it's really well done. It just has to be done well.
I was wondering what the photographers themselves felt about their fashion work. Was this left-hand work they were doing to fund their art, or were there interstices where they felt that it was a legitimate form of expression? Imagine someone fiercely edited their own books.
Yeah.
To turn them books.
Well, it depends on the photographer, obviously, and I can't answer for all of them. Like, one of the things I love about Mizell is that he's a complete fashion photographer, no shame, that's what he does. And he's great at it, and I don't think he doesn't pretend to be something better. And for me, there is nothing better. If you're that good. For me, there's nothing better than Avedon's fashion pictures. Although he certainly had other feelings about that eventually. The same with Penn. Penn's fashion pictures are wonderful. He doesn't value them, or he didn't value them in the same way he did his other work. But, to each his own. I think that certain fashion photographers want to put it in one place of their career. But I don't think too many people feel that way anymore. Certainly Jürgen Teller is not, shunting his fashion pictures off to the side. So I think that's a much more real way to look at the work. They're not doing something less by making a great fashion picture. If they're making bad fashion pictures, yes, they should try to forget it. But most of these, Jürgen Teller, Terry Richardson, a lot of people who, I think when people like Philip Lorca de Corsia, Nan Golden, Collier Shore, when they've made fashion pictures, they do it because they really enjoy it. And generally, they've done it really well. So I don't think, and especially Philip Lorca de Corsia is a good example, having done great work in W, finally put it in a book and put it on the wall in a gallery. So he's not pretending that this is something less. And I don't think for the most part it is. If they do think it's less, then often it is. If they sort of see it that way, then it's just not as good.
Okay, very last. There's one photographer you haven't mentioned.
Well, I kind of had mixed feelings about Annie Leibovitz. because I think she's a great magazine photographer, one of the best, and has been for years. I don't think she's a particularly great photographer outside of magazines. Often when I have very mixed feelings about her work on the wall, and I can't quite pin it down why. I just don't think that the work lives in the same way when it's put in frame. Some of it does, a lot of it doesn't. But I love her as a magazine photographer. I think she's been a really good fashion photographer. She, clearly is one of those people who is completely in control to a kind of, nutty degree. But that's what makes some of those pictures great. So I think she's been a really, interesting person in fashion because of what she could bring to it. But I kind of miss her moment when she was on the road with the Rolling Stones and doing that kind of work. I think she's great. But no, I don't think about her too much.
I have a really basic one for our class, I think. Do you have some tips or words of wisdom for aspiring critics? It's Linda's question in yes.
Words of wisdom for aspiring critics. Well, simply only write about things you really care about. That's what I would say. I don't know any other way. When people, I have a difficulty with assignments. If they're not my idea, I often just can't do it. It's kind of sad. I have to really want to write about what I'm writing about, and I do. I wouldn't be still doing it if I wasn't. So, and I think a lot of what I've done, I've learned as I've gone along. Like I said, I don't know anything about music. I didn't know anything about music when I started, but that certainly didn't stop me from writing about Smokey Robinson or the Jackson 5 or Aretha Franklin. I didn't need to know any more than I knew, or any more than I could bring to it. And certainly, it depends on what you're writing about. Clearly, I couldn't go back to writing about music now because I don't know anything about it. And I don't mean, chords and progression and that kind of thing. I don't know the producers. I don't know the people who are making music. I don't know that anymore. And yes, you do need to know all those things but once you're a part of something, and I think that's the only really way to be a critic, is to sort of feel you are a part of something, and you're part of that, and you want to be part of the conversation about that.
That's interesting. That's not the typical view. I mean, often
Really?
people think that, the idea of distance, that in fact to be able to comment on a phenomenon, you need to sort of be somehow separate.
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree, yes. On some level, you do have to stand back. You do have to have some perspective. I'm not saying I don't have any perspective, but for me, it's not as important as being deeply involved and then pulling back and sort of getting to see something about. I mean, it's often the most difficult thing for me to write about are the things that I care the most about, that I love, that I really love. There's a show in Chelsea right now that I'm really, really loving. A young photographer named Mike Brody, who is showing at Yossi Milo at the moment. He's somebody who traveled on the road with a lot of sort of hobo kids and photographed them over the years and was very much a part of that scene. And the pictures are beautiful on some level. They're very disturbing on some level. They're beautifully shot. And I'm just so caught up in them right now, to the point that I'm not sure how to pull back and what to say about them, except I'm in love with them. So this is I need to be able to pull back. I need to stop and think, who does he remind me of? Why is this good? Why do the pictures work? But I also need to be able to convey that I'm excited. So I think it's important to get all of that in there. And, you know, and for me, when I'm working in 100 words, that's the real challenge.
That's the goings on that time.
Yeah, the small things in the New Yorker are 110 words at most. So to be able to suggest how much I love the work and how much I think it's also important and why you should see it and who it reminds me of and who you should think about at the same time. It may not all get in there, but you know, that's the challenge for me. And I think it's important to well, I don't know. I just think it's not worth, that if you're writing about something you don't care about, it's going to show. And the critics that I love are the people who really are excited about what they're writing about and have a way of getting it across. And make you want to read them, even if I'm not interested in what they're writing about. Anyway, I could go.
Yeah, actually I want to invite you all to carry on the conversation in the other room with snacks and wine. But first, join me to thank and give Vince again, please.